The sharp command sliced through the air like a blade. "Shut up!" Marcus Miller, billionaire CEO, froze with his hand on the car door handle, his heart pounding as if something unseen had yanked him backward. Through the rearview mirror, he caught sight of a little girl with wide, piercing eyes in the back seat. He had no idea who she was. His breath stalled in his chest, and in that instant, the silence seemed to scream louder than any word. His first instinct was to react, to question, to demand she get out. But the tone in her voice carried no insolence, only fear. Her small body was tense, her fingers gripping the seat as if clinging to life itself. Outside, the parking lot was far too empty, and a cold wind swept across the afternoon like an omen. A strange pang twisted in Marcus's gut, a feeling that he was on the edge of hearing something that would change everything. The girl simply pointed toward the street, her gaze locked on him, as if to say every second mattered. Still confused, Marcus slowly turned the key in the ignition. The engine growled to life, but the loudest sound in the car was the pounding of his own heart. Something about that child told him it wasn't the moment for questions. Deep down, he knew. Some answers only come when you have the courage to follow a road you don't yet understand. Marcus kept his eyes on the road, but he couldn't ignore the little girl's reflection in the mirror. She couldn't have been more than 7, with warm brown skin and her hair pulled back into a messy ponytail, as if she'd been running from somewhere. She wasn't crying, but her lips trembled, and that spoke louder about her fear than any tears could. He tried to spark a conversation, but she only shook her head, a silent plea for him to say nothing. The cold was sharpening, and Marcus noticed his breath form a brief mist in front of him, as if the car itself were caught between two worlds, the warmth inside and the danger outside. A yellow light loomed ahead, but he didn't slow down. This was a moment when instinct outweighed rules, and something deep inside told him not to stop. The wind rattled against the windows, carrying with it a faint scent of smoke, and Marcus noticed the girl's pulse beating fast. This wasn't just a child's fear. It was the kind born from witnessing something one was never meant to see. He knew that when she finally spoke, his life could change forever, for better or for worse. But for now, the silence between them was the only bridge they had. Marcus kept his eyes on the road, yet he couldn't shake the image of the little girl reflected in the rearview mirror. She couldn't have been more than 7, with warm, sun-kissed skin and her hair pulled into a messy ponytail, as if she had just run from somewhere in a hurry. She wasn't crying, but her lips trembled, and that alone said more about her fear than any tears could. He tried to start a conversation, but she only shook her head, a silent plea for him to keep quiet. The cold was settling in deeper now, and Marcus noticed his breath forming a thin mist before him, as though the car itself were suspended between two worlds, the warmth within and the danger pressing from without. A yellow traffic light appeared ahead, but he didn't ease off the gas. This was a moment when instinct mattered more than rules, and something deep in his gut told him not to stop. The wind lashed against the windows, carrying with it the faint scent of smoke, and Marcus could see the rapid throb of the girl's pulse. This wasn't just a child's fear. It was the kind born from witnessing something no one should ever have to see. He knew that when she finally spoke, her words could change his life forever, for better or for worse. But for now, the silence between them was the only bridge they could safely cross. The narrow, dimly lit street seemed to stretch endlessly as the car moved forward. Marcus noticed the girl glancing over her shoulder again and again, as if afraid something, or someone, might suddenly appear. The flicker of passing streetlights swept across her face, revealing in her eyes a glimmer of urgency and a burden no child should ever have to carry. He wondered who she was, where she had come from, and why on earth she was in the back seat of his car. At a stoplight, she leaned forward and whispered, her voice nearly swallowed by the wind. "They're going to hurt you, and her too." A chill ran through Marcus's body. They. In the girl's mind, that word clearly had shape and a face, but to him it was only a looming, faceless threat. And her? What did she mean by that? His wife? Someone in his family? Fear tangled with confusion inside him, forming a knot that felt impossible to untie. The light turned green, but Marcus didn't accelerate right away. He sensed that with one wrong move, he could lose far more than he realized. Outside, a gust of wind carried a faint sound, maybe an engine, maybe footsteps. He drew in a steadying breath and decided to keep going. The silence between them now felt heavier, like a storm about to break. And deep down, he knew. The next minute could change everything. Marcus spotted the lights in his rearview mirror before he even heard the sound. 2 headlights, distant yet unwavering, followed his path as if they were fastened to his shadow. He tried to hold his speed steady, masking the tension in his grip, but the girl met his gaze with an expression that said, "I warned you." His heartbeat quickened, each thud echoing in the suffocating silence of the car. The street, once nearly deserted, now felt like a narrow corridor lined with invisible walls. The wind picked up, making the branches sway and cast twisted shadows across the asphalt. Marcus tightened his hold on the steering wheel, struggling to stay in control. But his instinct screamed that he was about to lose far more than just the road. The girl shrank into her seat, her eyes locked on the rear window, as if bracing for an inevitable strike. Without warning, the headlights blinked twice, then flared brighter. Marcus felt the air grow thin, as if the night itself had stopped to take a breath. He knew he had to act, but still didn't understand why. Worse yet, he didn't know who he could trust, not even the small passenger who, somehow, seemed to know more about his life than he did. The car behind them closed the gap, and Marcus felt the weight of its presence as if the air itself had grown heavier. He tried to reason it away. Maybe it was just coincidence, someone heading in the same direction. But then the vehicle matched his acceleration, mirroring his every move. The girl gripped her seatbelt tightly and whispered, her voice barely there, "If you stop, it's over." Marcus veered onto a narrow side street, hemmed in by tall walls. The sound of tires on wet pavement echoed in the night, blending with the uneven pounding in his chest. The pursuing car made the same turn, confirming the worst. The tension seemed to stretch time itself, making every second drag longer. He knew he needed an escape route, but one wrong move could seal both their fates. Then, in a sudden flash of memory, Marcus remembered an old service road leading to his family's abandoned warehouse. It wasn't safe, but it was a maze of entrances and exits. Without hesitation, he wrenched the wheel sharply. The girl didn't ask a single question. She simply closed her eyes, as if placing her trust in him, or bracing herself for a hell she already knew too well. The rusted gate groaned loudly as Marcus shoved it open with the car, sparks flying from the snapped chain. The place was shrouded in shadows, its walls stained with time and the air thick with the scent of damp earth. He pulled in quickly, killed the headlights, and let the engine purr low, like a predator on edge. The sound of the other car grew nearer, its approach echoing down the street, sharper with every passing second. The girl ducked low in her seat, as if she knew exactly where not to be seen. Marcus felt the cold wind slip through the cracks, carrying dust and the faint fragrance of wildflowers, stubbornly growing between the fractured concrete. It was a strange contrast, life blooming amid decay. He drew in a deep breath, willing himself to stay calm, though the pounding in his chest betrayed just how close to the edge he was. Suddenly, the enemy headlights swept across the warehouse entrance. Marcus held his breath as the beam sliced into the darkness like a silent flash of lightning. He knew he had only seconds before the hiding place was exposed. And in that sliver of time, the girl lifted her face and whispered, her words cutting like glass. "They're not here for me. They're here for you." Marcus knew hiding was no longer an option. The slam of a car door outside shattered the silence like a gunshot. Footsteps echoed against the concrete, slow, deliberate, the kind that savored the fear of their prey. Peering through the rusted gap in the gate, he saw two male silhouettes, tall shadows framed by the dim streetlight. The girl clutched his arm with a cold, trembling grip, as if holding on not just to his body but to what little courage he had left. The wind surged in, whipping up a swirl of dust and brittle leaves. Muffled voices reached them. Quick, almost whispered words, but heavy with something that sounded like anger. Marcus felt a tightness in his chest. Not only fear, but the sense that he was about to step into a chapter from which he wouldn't emerge unscathed. The warehouse, once a refuge, now seemed to shrink around them, becoming a trap. Then the girl leaned closer and spoke with a steady voice. "They know your name." The words cut deep, like a blade of ice. Marcus didn't ask how she knew. He simply understood, in the pit of his soul, that this was no chance encounter. Whatever was about to happen had been planned, and he had been the target from the very beginning. A deep voice called from outside, laced with a dangerous calm. "Marcus Miller, we know you're in there. Let's talk." The sound rolled through the warehouse, merging with the whistle of wind slipping through the cracks. A shiver ran down Marcus's spine. Hearing his name spoken like that turned the night into a silent trial. He rose slowly, forcing himself to stand tall, though each step forward felt heavier than the last. The girl stayed hidden, but her eyes tracked his every move. Marcus eased the door open just enough to see the two figures outside. One, tall and dressed in a dark suit, had his face half lit by the glow of the corner street lamp. The other kept his hands in his pockets, but the tight set of his shoulders betrayed readiness, coiled, waiting. The air between them seemed to hum with the tension of something about to snap. "It's not what you think, Marcus," the man in the suit said, his half-smile carrying more threat than reassurance. Marcus drew in a slow breath, trying to read the meaning between the words. Every instinct screamed not to trust them, but he also knew refusing to engage might cost him dearly. And in that moment, without fully thinking, he opened the door a little wider, only to realize he might have just made his first grave mistake of the night. As soon as the door opened a little wider, the man in the suit stepped forward, while the other moved to the side, cutting off any escape route. The calm tone vanished, replaced by a cold, deliberate stare. Unhurried, yet heavy with control. "There are things you need to know, Marcus. Things she won't tell you," he said, gesturing subtly towards the inside, as if he already knew about the girl's presence. A sharp gust of wind rattled the warehouse, making its old structure groan. Still curled up, the girl frowned and shook her head with conviction. A silent plea for him not to believe them. Marcus felt the weight of two possible truths pressing the air from his lungs. Trust the strangers and surrender to an uncertain fate, or believe in a child who had appeared out of nowhere, carrying what seemed to be a dangerous secret. A metallic snap shattered the standoff. The man with his hands in his pockets had pulled something out, and the quick glint of metal under the streetlight left no room for doubt. Marcus stepped back, slamming the door shut. The sound thundered through the warehouse like a warning shot, announcing that the storm had finally begun. The sound of hurried footsteps pounded outside, followed by the dull thud of fists or boots against the iron door. Marcus knew he had only moments before they tried to force their way in. The wind swept through the warehouse, carrying the scent of wet earth and rust, as if the night itself were complicit in the hunt. The girl moved closer, her wide eyes fixed on him, not wet with tears, but lit with more determination than fear. His gaze darted around the room, searching for anything that could serve as a barricade. He spotted an old wooden crate and dragged it to the door, the scrape of wood against concrete echoing like a warning to the intruders. On the other side, silence returned for a few seconds, but it was the kind of silence that moves, that thinks, calculates, and waits for the perfect moment to strike. Marcus felt his heartbeat slam against his ribs, as if it wanted to tear its way out. The girl leaned in, her voice nearly swallowed by the howl of the wind. "If they get in, don't fight. Run!" A strange command from someone so small, yet the steadiness in her words made it clear. She knew exactly what she was talking about. Marcus didn't answer. He just drew in his breath and readied himself, fully aware this would be the first real test of the night. The crash came without warning. The door gave way with a metallic groan, and the crate Marcus had wedged against it slid across the floor as if it were made of paper. Two men burst inside, their figures cut into sharp shadows by the dim streetlight, the echo of their boots pounding through the warehouse like hammer blows. Marcus instinctively stepped back, positioning himself between the girl and the intruders as the wind swept in carrying dust and a biting chill. "It's over, Marcus. No need to make this harder," the man in the suit said, moving forward at an unhurried pace, as though time itself bent to his will. The other kept one hand buried inside his coat, the metallic glint visible again, clearer this time. The air thickened, and Marcus could hear his own heartbeat thundering in his ears, drowning out every other sound, except the steady, unnervingly composed breathing of the girl behind him. Then she tugged lightly at his shirt and whispered, "Through that door." Now. He followed her gaze to a narrow side exit, cracked open, half hidden in shadow. It was a gamble. If the men noticed, there would be no turning back. But something in her voice, almost a silent promise, made Marcus take that first step toward escape. Marcus ran, gripping the girl's hand as they tore across the dark space toward the side door. The pounding of boots echoed behind them, each step closing the distance. A rush of cold wind swept through the exit, carrying the scent of approaching rain. Like the storm outside was a mirror of the one about to break over them. His heart pounded so fast it seemed to set the tempo for their flight. They burst into a narrow corridor flanked by peeling walls and shattered windows. Moonlight slipped through the gaps, casting shadows that danced like restless specters across their path. Behind them, a voice shouted his name, thick with anger, and Marcus quickened his pace. The girl never looked back. Her gaze was locked ahead, as if following an invisible map only she could see. A metallic clang rang out against the wall to their left. Something had been thrown or fired. Marcus ducked instinctively, shielding the girl. The night's chill tangled with the heat of fear, and he knew there was no turning back now. The only way out was to keep running until the next obstacle rose up to block their path. After rounding two corners and cutting across an overgrown vacant lot, Marcus pulled the girl into an abandoned garage. His breathing was ragged, each inhale burning as if he'd run miles. Outside, the sounds of their pursuers faded, swallowed by distance, and the wind that now carried the first drops of rain. The silence that followed felt like a reprieve, but it bore the weight of something far from over. The girl sat in a corner, knees drawn tightly to her chest, yet her eyes stayed sharp and watchful. Marcus crouched in front of her, cold sweat mingling with the dust on his forehead. "Who are they? And what do they want with me?" he asked, his voice controlled but edged with urgency, careful not to scare her further. She didn't answer right away, as if weighing every word before letting it out. Finally, she said, "They have her, and she's going to die if you don't do something." The words hit him like a punch to the gut. Marcus felt the world tilt, struggling to grasp who she meant. Outside, the rain began to fall harder, drumming against the rusted roof. The sound seemed to count down the seconds he had to decide, whether to believe this girl or accept that it might all be part of a meticulously laid trap. Marcus felt his chest tighten, but he kept his gaze steady on the girl. "Who is she?" he asked, forcing his voice to stay even, though anxiety pressed at the edges. The girl lowered her eyes for a moment, fidgeting with the frayed hem of her torn shirt, as if searching for courage in the folds of the fabric. When she finally spoke, her voice was soft, almost a thread. "Diana, she said she was your friend, but she's not." The name rang familiar, like a distant echo, stirring uneasy memories. Diana was more than just an acquaintance. She had been a constant presence at company events, always by his and his wife's side, as if she were part of the family. The thought that she might be tied to those men made Marcus's stomach turn. The wind slipping through the broken door carried the damp scent of wet earth, and with every gust, the sense of danger sharpened anew. The girl looked up again, this time with startling resolve. "She's betraying you, and she's going to use you to get what she wants. But first, she needs to destroy you." The words fell between them like a verdict, leaving Marcus frozen. It was as if each syllable was a stone, building a wall between what he thought he knew and the truth he was about to face. The rain grew heavier, drumming against the roof in a steady rhythm, like a clock reminding him that time was slipping away. Marcus kept his eyes locked on the girl, waiting for her to finish what she had started. She drew a deep breath and in a tone almost solemn said, "They know where your house is. And someone's already there." His heart kicked into a furious pace, each beat pounding in his ears like a war drum. He leaned closer, his voice lower but charged with urgency. "Who's there?" The girl didn't flinch. "Your wife. And the baby." The words hit Marcus like a bolt of lightning, freezing him in place for a second that felt like forever. Clara's face, his wife, flashed vividly in his mind, followed by the fresh memory of learning she was pregnant. The new life they had been waiting for was now in danger. A gust of wind slipped through the cracked door, carrying the scent of drenched earth and a chill that cut straight to his bones. Marcus realized he was no longer running just to save himself. There were 2 lives hanging on every decision he made from this moment on. And the girl, in some strange way, seemed to know more about this fight than he could ever imagine. Marcus rose abruptly, as if the ground beneath his feet had turned to fire. The girl watched him in silence, her eyes holding a quiet relief, as though she knew he had finally grasped the gravity of it all. "I have to get to them, now," he said, more to himself than to her. Outside, the pounding rain seemed to applaud his decision, each drop striking the rusted roof with fierce insistence. He scanned the abandoned garage, mentally tracing a route to his home. The streets were likely being watched, and retracing his steps would be suicide. Then the girl stood as well and pointed to a door in the back, almost hidden behind an old wardrobe. "There's a shortcut through here, but it's dangerous," she said without blinking. Marcus hesitated for a heartbeat, weighing the cost of the choice. Danger was already part of the bargain, but what was at stake outweighed every fear. He stepped toward the door, feeling his pulse quicken and the air grow colder. There was no room left for doubt, only for action. The door creaked as it swung open, revealing a narrow corridor swallowed in near total darkness. The stench of mold and rust was strong, as if the place had been abandoned for years. The only light seeped through cracks in the roof, where rain fell in silver threads, splashing onto the fractured cement floor. Marcus felt his body tense, not just from the cold, but from the sense that he was stepping into a place where every shadow could be hiding an enemy. The girl moved ahead of him, stepping with deliberate care, as though she knew every weak spot in the floor. The sound of falling drops echoed all around, blending with the quickened pace of Marcus's breathing. The tension was so thick it felt almost tangible. With each step, the noises of the street faded further into the distance, but that also meant they were isolating themselves completely. Halfway down the corridor, a sudden crack made Marcus stop in his tracks. Something, or someone, was there. The girl slowly turned her face toward him and pressed a finger to her lips, urging silence. That small, simple gesture sent his heartbeat racing faster. There was no turning back now. The only choice was to keep moving forward, even if each step drew them deeper into an unseen danger. The crack came again, this time closer, followed by a dragging sound, metal scraping against the floor. Marcus felt the air grow thin, every sense straining to full alert. The girl froze for a heartbeat, then seized his hand and pulled him into a corner, tucking them behind a stack of rusted crates. The pounding rain above seemed to match the rhythm of his racing pulse. Out of the darkness ahead, a silhouette emerged, a thin man in a hood, carrying a flashlight, moving slowly, like a predator stalking prey. The beam swept the corridor, coming within inches of finding them before stopping. Marcus held his breath, the weight of the moment stretching each second into a fragile thread ready to snap. The girl's grip tightened, her eyes silently warning. Not now. When the man turned in the opposite direction, she tugged Marcus toward a narrow side passage, almost invisible in the shadows. The sound of the man's footsteps grew fainter behind them, but never vanished entirely. Marcus knew the escape was far from over, and that every step brought them closer to home, and closer to the inevitable confrontation awaiting them. The narrow passage ended at a low door that creaked like a warning with each gust of wind. When Marcus pushed it open, the cold night air rushed against his face. They stepped out into a dimly lit alley, its walls slick with moss, the distant hum of traffic drifting in from the main avenue. The rain had grown heavier now, falling in sheets that made every step a struggle. The girl released his hand and moved toward the corner, scanning the street before motioning for him to follow. Marcus noticed the way she seemed to calculate every turn, as if navigating an invisible map etched into her mind. Yet there was something in her eyes that told him time was slipping away, and that every minute lost could come at a steep price. When they rounded the corner, Marcus saw it parked beneath the sickly glow of a yellow street lamp. A car he recognized instantly, Diana's personal vehicle. His heart lurched, and for a moment his breath caught in his throat. The girl didn't speak. She simply lifted her chin toward the car, as if to say, "The proof is right there." Marcus moved forward slowly, each step sinking into the rainwater pooling on the asphalt. The downpour streamed down his face, but he barely blinked, his eyes locked on the car idling beneath the yellow glow of the street lamp. The fogged glass made it hard to see inside, but a silhouette shifted in the driver's seat. With every step, his heartbeat quickened, as if his body was warning him that nothing he was about to see would be easy to bear. The girl lingered several paces behind, watching intently but making no move to intervene. Marcus stopped beside the driver's door and tapped lightly on the window. The figure inside turned, and it was Diana. She flashed a quick smile, but her eyes, cold and calculating, betrayed that this meeting was no accident. The steady patter of rain seemed to merge with the low hum of a distant engine, wrapping the moment in a heavy, oppressive stillness. "You shouldn't be here, Marcus," she said, opening the door with a rehearsed calm. That's when he saw it. Something on the back seat, covered by a coat. The shape was unmistakable. A small form, as if something or someone was hidden there. His breathing hitched, and the world around him seemed to shrink until there was nothing left but that car. Marcus stepped to the side, every muscle on high alert, and leaned in to get a better look beneath the coat. Diana, noticing the movement, raised a hand as if to urge him to stay calm, but her gaze hardened. Rain hammered against the car's metal roof, drowning out every other sound. With a swift motion, Marcus yanked the fabric away, and the air seemed to vanish from his lungs. Beneath the coat, bound and gagged, was Clara. Her wide, tear-filled eyes held a fragile mix of fear and relief at the sight of him. Marcus felt the world tilt, as though the ground beneath him was glass, ready to shatter. The girl, who had remained still until now, stepped forward, her face pale, as if witnessing the confirmation of a warning she had already known in her bones. Diana made no move to stop him from seeing, only folded her arms and spoke in an icy tone. "Now you understand why you can't just run." The storm outside seemed to echo inside Marcus, thundering alongside the crushing weight of the decision he would have to make, and fast. Marcus kept his eyes locked on Diana, fighting the urge to lunge at her. Rain streamed down his face, but inside, the heat of his anger felt like it was boiling through his veins. "Let her go. Now," he said, his voice steady, every word carrying a weight you could almost feel. In the back seat, Clara shifted, trying to make a sound through the gag, while the girl stood at a distance, watching as if she knew this moment could decide the course of the night. Diana stepped aside, leaning casually against the open car door. Her smile held no warmth. It was nothing more than a cold mask. "It's not that simple, Marcus. You owe me. And now, you're going to pay my way." She spoke slowly, deliberately, as though she wanted to etch each syllable into his mind. The hum of the running engine merged with the low rumble of distant thunder, wrapping the scene in a cinematic tension. Marcus clenched his fists, feeling his pulse pound in his ears. "If you touch her, there won't be a place on this earth you can hide," he replied, his voice laced with a dark promise. Diana arched an eyebrow, unfazed, and shook her head as if she held the strings to everything. "This isn't about fear, Marcus. It's about power. And right now, all of it belongs to me." Diana tilted her head slightly, as if assessing her opponent before delivering the final blow. "You've always thought you knew who to trust, Marcus. But you forgot that the people closest to you are the ones who know your weaknesses best." Her voice carried an almost sweet tone, but every word dripped with poison. Clara, eyes brimming with tears, tried to shift, but the bindings kept her firmly in place. "This isn't about money. It isn't about business," Diana went on, stepping closer. "It's about taking from you what you value most: family, loyalty, respect. You took all of that from me years ago and you didn't even notice." Marcus frowned, digging through his memory for any moment that might justify her accusation. but all he found was a confusing void. The strong wind whipped through her wet hair, sharpening the menace in her expression. The girl, who had been watching from a distance, took a step forward, as if she could no longer bear to listen. "You're lying," she said, her voice steady despite her young age. Diana shot her a frigid look, and for an instant, the silence between them felt like a field on the brink of detonation. Marcus realized that beneath all the anger, there was something still unspoken. Something that bound the three of them together in a way he did not yet understand. Diana let out a short, almost soundless laugh, shifting her gaze from Marcus to the girl. "You should be thanking me, you know. If it weren't for me, this little one would never have found her way to you." The words landed heavy, like stones hurled into the silence. A chill crept up Marcus's spine. "What are you talking about?" he asked, fighting to keep his voice steady. She shrugged, as if it were a trivial detail. "Nothing happens by chance, Marcus. She knew exactly where to find you, and why." Diana's eyes narrowed, and for a moment it looked as if she were savoring the sting of her revelation. The girl, however, went pale, avoiding Marcus's gaze, as though a secret locked in iron was about to slip free. The rain pounded harder against the car, drumming a rhythm that felt almost hypnotic. Marcus's pulse quickened, not just from the threat to his wife, but from the growing suspicion that this child wasn't merely a lost victim in the night. And the sense that the truth was now dangerously close stole the breath from his lungs. Marcus turned slowly, still carrying the weight of Diana's words. The girl stood a few steps back, her small frame drawn in, her gaze restless. Cold streams of rain traced through her dark hair, plastering it to her face as she avoided looking at him directly. "What did she mean?" he asked, his voice lower than he intended, laden with an urgency the storm itself couldn't drown out. The girl drew in a deep breath, but didn't answer right away. Her fingers fidgeted with the frayed hem of her shirt, as if trying to pull courage from the worn stitches. "I knew who you were, before I found you," she said at last, her eyes still fixed on the ground. Marcus felt the air grow heavier, as though the world around them had shrunk until only that revelation remained. Behind him, Diana watched like a predator biding her time to strike. "And why didn't you tell me?" Marcus pressed, stepping closer. The girl finally lifted her face, and in her eyes was something caught between fear and sorrow. "Because if you knew, maybe you wouldn't have helped me." The answer landed like a silent blow, leaving Marcus torn between the need for truth and the desperate urgency to save Clara. Marcus took a step closer, shutting out Diana's presence for a fleeting moment. "Look at me and tell me what you're hiding," he said, his voice steady, yet cracked just enough to let his worry slip through. The girl slowly lifted her eyes, and in them was a glint that carried both courage and guilt. A thunderclap split the air in the distance, as if the sky itself braced for what was about to be revealed. "My mother. She spoke of you before she died," the girl began, her voice trembling. "She said that one day I would find you, and that when I did, I should trust you, even if it seemed dangerous." Marcus felt the ground vanish beneath his feet. He didn't know her mother, or at least he thought he didn't, and the idea that he might be bound to this child by a story he'd never heard rattled something deep inside him. Diana let out a low, knowing laugh, like someone watching a game whose ending they already knew. "See? She's not just some coincidence lost in the rain. She was sent to you." Marcus felt the blood pounding in his temples. The rain hammered harder against the car, ticking away like a merciless clock. He knew he couldn't let this moment pass without getting the whole truth, but every second spent here put Clara in greater danger. The girl drew a deep breath, as if carrying that secret had weighed on her for years. Her name was Helena Duarte, she said, pronouncing each syllable with deliberate care. The sound of the name made Marcus freeze, a chill crawling down his spine. It was a name buried deep in his past, tied to a time he rarely allowed himself to revisit. Years before he became a CEO, when he was still struggling to rebuild after a devastating personal loss. "She said you saved her life once, long before I was born," the girl continued, her voice steady despite the tears threatening to fall. "And she told me to find you if I was ever in danger." Marcus closed his eyes for a moment, and fractured images began to surface. A community shelter, a winter storm, a frightened young woman clutching a thin blanket. A memory that had always felt distant now had a clear face and a name. Diana watched in silence, though the faint curl of her lips betrayed that this revelation was part of her design. "So, Marcus," she said, almost purring, "it seems fate and debt have decided to meet tonight, doesn't it?" The rain kept falling, heavier now, as if the whole world were trying to wash away the weight of this unexpected reunion. Marcus knew the truth was finally taking shape, but that the cost of protecting it would be steep. Marcus felt the weight of the revelation pounding in his temples, but there was no room left for hesitation. The image of Clara, bound and vulnerable in the back seat, burned inside him like fire consuming dry paper. "It's over, Diana," he said, stepping forward. His voice wasn't loud, but it carried a resolve that made every word sound like a verdict. Beside him, the girl stood motionless, as if holding her breath. Diana narrowed her eyes, keeping her stance by the open car door. "You're not in a position to decide how this ends, Marcus. Not yet." A sharp gust of wind swept through, carrying the scent of earth and the first leaves torn from the trees. The street lamp above them flickered, casting shifting shadows over the three of them, like the night itself was putting them to the test. He knew that any wrong move could cost lives, but waiting any longer would only feed her advantage. He glanced at the girl and, without a word, gave a quick nod. The plan wasn't even fully formed in his mind, but it was time to turn fear into action. And somehow, he knew she would understand exactly what needed to be done. The silence between them shattered when Diana flicked her hand in a sharp gesture. From the shadow beside the car, one of the men emerged, closing in with steady steps and eyes locked on Marcus. The girl instinctively stepped back, but Marcus moved forward, placing himself squarely between her and the threat. The rain now fell like blades, each icy drop striking his skin like a summons to act. "You think you can stop me, Marcus?" Diana taunted, her tone laced with calculated contempt. The man advanced another step, and Marcus caught the glint of something in his hand, not a gun, but a short, solid metal bar, heavy enough to drop a man in one blow. Thunder cracked overhead, deep and violent, wrapping the moment in a charged, oppressive tension. Marcus shifted his stance, squaring his shoulders, ready for the clash. Inside, his heart pounded like a war drum, but outwardly, his face was a mask of cold control. He knew he couldn't just strike. He needed the perfect opening, a mistake from his opponent, one heartbeat that could turn the tide. And with a quick glance at the girl, he realized she was waiting for that moment just as much as he was. The man raised the metal bar, ready to strike, and in that split second, Marcus moved. A quick step to the side, dodging the blow, and he caught the attacker's arm in a tight grip, using the man's own momentum to slam him down into a muddy puddle. The impact was sharp, the sound swallowed by the roar of the torrential rain. The girl darted towards the side of the car, her movements swift, as if she already knew exactly what had to be done. Diana stepped back, momentarily startled, though she quickly regained her composure. "This won't change anything," she said, but there was a new edge in her voice. Marcus kept his gaze locked on her, still pinning the thug to the ground. Cold water seeped up his legs, but adrenaline burned through every muscle, keeping him sharp. The storm around them seemed to mirror the battle that had only just begun. On the other side of the car, the girl quietly opened the back door, reaching for Clara. The rip of tape peeling away and the muffled sound of his wife's voice sent a surge of strength through Marcus. In that moment, he knew this was the start of a turning point, but also that Diana would never let it play out without fighting to the bitter end. Marcus kept the attacker pinned to the ground, feeling the man's body twist and strain to break free. The rain drenched everything, making each movement more slippery, more dangerous. Over his shoulder, he caught sight of the girl leaning over Clara, peeling away the tape with trembling yet determined hands. Clara gasped as the air hit her lungs, her tear-filled eyes shining with relief. Diana saw what was happening and moved quickly around to the other side of the car, but Marcus reacted faster. He shoved the thug hard against the wall and lunged toward her. The slap of his footsteps through the water merged with a thunderclap overhead, as if the storm itself were keeping pace with the pounding in his chest. "It's over, Diana," he said again, this time without hesitation. She gripped the rear door tightly, blocking Clara's escape. The girl locked eyes with Marcus, and in that single look, he understood. This was the moment to decide whether the fight ended here or whether they would all go down together. With a sharp motion, Marcus seized Diana's arm and wrenched her away from the door. She tried to resist, but his momentum threw her off balance for an instant. The girl took the opening, pulling Clara out of the car and helping her steady herself despite her still bound hands. Clara's breathing was ragged, the rain streaming down her face as if trying to wash away the fear carved there. Diana recovered quickly, her eyes sparking with rage. "You don't understand, Marcus! This isn't just about you!" she shouted, her voice nearly swallowed by the wind and thunder. He ignored her, planting himself between her and the two of them, his body angled forward, ready to block any move she might make. The flooded ground reflected the flickering street lamp, distorting their shadows into something almost monstrous. Clara tried to speak, but her voice faltered. Even so, she managed to whisper, "Go. Finish this." Marcus felt the weight of those words ripple through his entire body. The girl met his eyes with equal intensity, and for the first time, he saw in them not just courage, but a silent plea. The fight wasn't over. It had simply changed shape. Marcus stepped forward, leaving Clara and the girl behind. The rain fell like a heavy shroud, plastering his shirt to his skin and making every breath harder to draw. Diana stood with her chin lifted, shoulders squared, as if she hadn't just lost her advantage. "You've always underestimated what I'm capable of," she said, her voice slicing through the air like a blade. He didn't answer. Instead, he lunged, and they collided hard, the muffled thud of impact merging with the crack of thunder overhead. Marcus gripped her arms, forcing her back, while she twisted to break free, her nails raking against his forearm. The slick ground turned every move into a gamble, but he held his footing with a near-feral resolve. For a moment, their faces hovered inches apart. Her breath came fast, and her eyes blazed with a mix of rage and something Marcus couldn't quite name. Fear, maybe, or pride. "You'll never stop me," she whispered, and he, his voice low and unwavering, answered, "I already have." Diana's body twisted again in a final attempt to break free, but Marcus shoved her hard against the car, the metallic clang ringing out beneath the storm. Rain streamed down both their faces, washing away sweat and fury, yet nothing could dim the fire of tension burning in their eyes. Just a few meters away, Clara and the girl stood frozen, holding their breath as if any movement could alter the fate of the night. Diana tried to turn her face away, but Marcus gripped her jaw firmly. "It's over. You're never touching anyone in my family again," he said, his voice low and rough, nearly drowned by the roar of the storm. She gave a short, bitter laugh, but there was a faint tremor in her stance. The first hint that she might have lost control of the game. A flash of lightning split the sky, illuminating the scene in a single searing instant, like a photograph etched in white fire. In that frozen moment, Marcus realized it wasn't just brute strength holding him there. It was the unshakable choice to protect, no matter the cost. And when the darkness rushed back in, he knew the next move would decide not only who would win, but who would survive. Marcus felt the weight of every second from that night pressing into this single moment. With a swift motion, he twisted Diana's arm, forcing her to drop something she had hidden inside her coat, a small blade that clattered to the ground with a cold, metallic ring. She gasped, struggling to regain her balance, but he shoved her away from the car door, carving out a safe space for Clara and the girl. "You don't understand. There are more people involved," Diana said, her voice breaking under the strain of pain and rage. Marcus didn't answer. His eyes made it clear that any words would be a waste of time. He stepped forward instead, pinning her against the side of the car, the stance of a man making sure no shadow would dare move again. The rain poured down in relentless sheets, a curtain isolating them from the rest of the world. Clara, now free, stepped forward and placed her hand gently on Marcus's arm. "That's enough," she said, her soft voice cutting clean through the roar of the storm. Marcus drew a deep breath, not releasing Diana, but feeling that touch return a fragment of calm he hadn't felt since the night began. The girl stepped forward slowly, soaked to the bone, but with her gaze steady. She stood beside Marcus, locking eyes with Diana as if she had no fear of facing the person who had tried to destroy them. "She won't stop. Not if we just walk away," she said, her voice low but cutting. There was a strange maturity in her tone for someone so young, and Marcus felt the weight of truth in every word. Even cornered, Diana kept a faint smile tugging at the corner of her lips. "See? She understands me better than you think," she taunted. But the girl took another step forward, her expression hardening. "I understand you. And that's exactly why I won't let you hurt anyone else." The silence that followed was heavy, broken only by the relentless sound of rain and the wind lashing against the nearby walls. Marcus glanced from the girl to Clara, realizing that the final choice had to be his. But her courage was fueling his own. As he placed a hand on the girl's shoulder, he understood they weren't just saving their own lives that night. They were ending a cycle that had begun long before they had ever met. Marcus held Diana in his gaze for several long seconds, as if trying to see past the anger and hatred radiating from her. The sound of the rain seemed to swell, hammering the moment with a heavy, unyielding rhythm. He thought of everything he had lost, of every fear this night had stirred, and how, despite it all, he had still managed to protect what mattered most. Clara was alive, the girl was safe, and maybe, just maybe, it was time to break the cycle. "You're going to answer for what you've done," he said at last, his voice firm and leaving no room for negotiation. It wasn't a shout. It was a verdict. He pulled his phone from his pocket, shielded by its rain-soaked case, and typed quickly. Minutes later, the distant wail of sirens began to pierce the heavy air of the storm. For the first time that night, Diana's expression slipped. The girl stood beside him as if this moment marked the end of her own journey as well. Clara stepped closer, slipping her arm around Marcus, and together they formed a silent wall between Diana and any hope of escape. Red and blue lights cut through the rain, turning the night into a stage for the ending they all knew had to come. The patrol cars screeched to a stop, the hiss of tires blending with the pounding rain. Doors slammed, and 2 officers hurried toward the group, one gripping Diana's shoulder firmly while the other checked on Clara and the girl. Marcus stood tall, but every muscle still hummed with the fading surge of adrenaline. The air felt lighter now, yet it still carried the metallic tang of tension that had ruled every moment until now. One of the officers asked quickly what had happened, and Marcus gave a concise answer. His voice steady, but leaving out the darker details, the ones that belonged only to them. The girl stayed close, listening in silence, as if each word was a brick in the foundation of a new life. Clara, now wrapped in a blanket, looked at him with gratitude, and in that look was more than any explanation could hold. As Diana was led to the back seat of the cruiser, she cast one last glance at Marcus, not of complete defeat, but with the lingering promise that this story wasn't over. Marcus held her gaze for a moment before turning away, knowing that while this battle was done, the weight of the revelations and the bonds newly uncovered would stay with him for a long time to come. With Diana in the cruiser and the sirens fading into the distance, the rain softened to a steady murmur. Marcus stepped to Clara, wrapping her carefully in his arms, as if shielding her not only from the cold, but from the weight of everything the night had carried. She rested her face against his chest, listening to the steady beat of a heart that only minutes ago had pounded with raw tension. A few steps away, the girl stood watching, a blend of shyness and relief in her eyes. Marcus reached out his hand to her, and for a moment she hesitated. Then, with a small, cautious step, she took it. "You're safe now," he said, his voice low and warm, carrying a promise far deeper than the words themselves. Her eyes, so often clouded with fear that night, now held something different, a faint spark of trust beginning to take shape. Clara, still weak, looked from the girl to Marcus. "Let's take her home," she said softly. And at the sound of the word home, Marcus realized he wasn't just protecting 2 lives. He was planting the seed of a family he'd never imagined building. The storm had passed, but the future was only beginning to take root. Weeks had passed since that storm-soaked night, yet for Marcus, Clara, and the girl, now officially called by the name she had revealed on their first morning together, Sophia, the memory remained as vivid as lightning etched into their minds. The house, once silent and cold, now carried new sounds: light footsteps in the hallway, shy laughter, and the soft clink of dishes shared around the table. It was a home being rebuilt, brick by brick, not only in its walls but in their hearts. Clara, still recovering physically, spent part of her days teaching Sophia how to tend the small garden behind the house. Together, they planted rose bushes, and from his spot on the porch, Marcus saw in those blooms the perfect symbol of what they were living. Thorns and beauty side by side, always with the promise that something new would grow. With each petal that opened, it felt as though another piece of the dark past was crumbling away. News about Diana and her accomplices trickled in. Formal charges, ongoing investigations, evidence piling up. But for Marcus, the real miracle wasn't in the courts. It was in the way that, after so much loss and fear, they could wake each day believing life could be different. The silence of the night was no longer a threat. It was peace. It was late afternoon, and the sky was painted in shades of gold and orange, spilling its light across the porch of the house. Marcus sat in a wooden chair, watching Sophia play with a small pot of soil. At one point she stopped, looked at him, and asked in a quiet voice, "Why did you help me, even though you didn't know me?" The simplicity of the question carried an unexpected weight, making Marcus pause before answering. He leaned forward, resting his elbows on his knees. "Because someone helped me when I needed it most, a long time ago. And I learned that when we have the chance, we should be for others what was once a miracle for us." His words came out steady, yet held a warmth that wrapped around the girl like an invisible embrace. Sophia bit her lip softly, holding back a shy smile. A gentle breeze carried the scent of the freshly planted roses, and for a moment, everything felt perfectly at peace. Sophia stepped closer and rested her head against his arm. "Then I guess you're my miracle," she said, almost in a whisper. Marcus closed his eyes for a moment, feeling the words carve themselves into his soul. From that moment on, he knew there was no more her and us. There was only family. That night, Marcus lingered alone on the porch, gazing at the clear sky after days of storm. The silence that had once carried fear now felt like an old friend, bringing peace with every breath. Inside the house, Clara laughed softly with Sophia as they prepared something simple for dinner, and that sound, more than any prize or accomplishment, was proof he had made the right choice. He thought about how much had changed since that moment in the parking lot, when an urgent, childlike voice had told him, "Shut up." Back then, he had no idea those words would open a path of fear, courage, and redemption. Now, he understood that sometimes miracles arrive in strange forms, wearing the disguise of problems we never asked for, but that change us forever. Marcus drew in a deep breath, the scent of the rose bushes mingling with the cool night air. "As long as there's love, we'll never be alone," he murmured to himself. And with that thought, he stepped inside to join his family, knowing that despite the scars, they had built something neither time, nor pain, nor storms could ever destroy. And so, after a night marked by fear, courage, and revelation, Marcus learned that victory doesn't always lie in defeating the enemy, but in protecting the ones we love. The girl who had entered his life as a mystery became an inseparable part of his family, and, in the process, proved that miracles do exist, even when they arrive wrapped in storms. If this story touched your heart, give it a like, subscribe to the channel, and turn on notifications so you don't miss the next stories. And tell me in the comments, do you believe unexpected encounters can forever change the course of our lives?